It's not that marijuana is bad, it's that you're bad for marijuana. I'll say that again. You're bad for marijuana. It's like, you're the sick one. I've got 14 years of sobriety, and I'll never forget when I came to the full revelation of this sick relationship that I was the cause of. Like, marijuana in and of itself is not bad, not evil. There's no moral like imperative or label that you can get to it, despite the attempts of federal government, which is really just an administrative process to save a public from forms of abuse, right? Really has less to do about marijuana itself and more to do about the sickening of a public discourse and the need for medicalization that the drug market fulfills in a sick society. I mean, I made a short on this. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the relationship to cannabis, both individually and socially. Like, I got super sick in relationship to cannabis. I became a codependent. I relied upon cannabis as a medicine. Like, at first it was fun, right? Those of us that have tried the cannabis, the marijuana, we know that the benefits are beautiful forms of like getting high, like the sensation, the expansion of consciousness. It's all valid, exceptional, like mind expansive forms of intimacy that I got in community. It was like beautiful. I mean, the first time that I got high was an exceptional experience. That's why I had such a hard time growing up in sort of the 80s realm where you have Nancy Reagan be like, keep kids off drugs. And I was like, well, clearly not doing the drugs that I'm doing because they're exceptional. And so there was this like cognitive dissonance. I felt like it was so hypocritical. Like, you can't tell me to not smoke pot. Like, you have never smoked pot. And so why would I listen to you? I'm over here, high school, approaching like valedictorian and crushing captain of the soccer team, just getting my name in the newspaper, completely stoned all game, bongs before the game. And so I had a hard time being sit down by my father and other authority, like messages from the federal government telling me like this was bad. And I'm sitting here as a teen like, you guys are confused. Like, not only do I not are you losing integrity in the messaging because what you're communicating doesn't line up with my experience, but I'm over here performing in a way that you all are saying is accountable, is saying like, that's exceptional. Like, keep doing that. I'm like, well, I'm high doing all this. So the catch was that eventually, and we know this through addiction studies, we know this through what's called chemical dependency, is that in the long run, our bodies, our physiological bodies, develop tolerance. And that tolerance grows and grows and grows. And we have to use more of whatever, like name the pharmaceutical drug that like, whoa, that Prozac's not working out. You've been taking it for 17 years. I wonder why it's not working anymore. Your body develops tolerance. And the process of breaking forms of chemical dependency is a painful one. And if you use anything long enough, you develop tolerance to that, especially the mind mood altering plant helpers that are available, erstwhile drugs, according to the federal government. So there's an incredible process going on right now socially, where it's like we are locking people up for mental disorders on the basis of drug charges. This is completely immoral. And there's an elevation of that awareness through forms of psychology and healing interventions and all sorts of therapeutic sort of advocacy to say like, hey, no, we're not dealing people on drugs, we're dealing with sick people, and criminalization isn't the method to pursue healing. And so we're getting a liberalization happening, especially with cannabis, all over the planet. I mean, obviously Amsterdam's like well ahead of the curve, and European cities, but now in the States. And so with that increases forms of overuse. And that's what happened. It's like, after my teenage years, I moved to San Francisco from a very conservative Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the roads were like paved with marijuana. I mean, like the cannabis clubs were accessible, and I started to sort of get a vision of like, oh, here's a healthy approach, not a repressive, sort of like hyper moralistic approach, but a healthy approach to cannabis. It was just that like I was becoming sick, and I was relying upon cannabis to medicate. Eventually, it became a medication that went beyond dependency to addiction. And there's as many people as existing on the planet that have experimented and used cannabis regularly. There's that many experiences. But there is a patterning. There is a predictive pattern of relationship to overusing cannabis. And what happened was that it was like, personally, and I've seen this happen over and over in my clients in the 12-step realm, in which I sort of have grown just have so much deep love for and appreciation for the spiritual path that's available there. But you'll see this pattern over and over, that it's a romantic experience at first, a mind expansive encounter with alternative forms of consciousness, new neurological wirings that are brought on by the drug. And it's so incredible and so almost elusive that we go back to it again and again and again in pursuit of that euphoric spiritual ecstasy, that spiritual experience. And then eventually it's not as readily accessible anymore, and we continue to use. And then all of a sudden we discover that we can use a little bit of cannabis or alcohol or whatever to help manage our emotional states. And then it's nice in social settings. And then all of a sudden daily use unfolds, and there's a relationship of dependency. It's no more recreational, it's now dependent. And then you cross another threshold where dependency becomes, like the full-blown chemical dependency becomes addiction. And the drug's no longer, like there's no longer any additive. It becomes itself the poison. And that was my story with cannabis. And it's like over and over. There's a reason that Marijuana Anonymous exists in the world. It's because this is like people have written stories about it, and I identify this because it's like a common experience. I'm already getting comments on videos about marijuana addiction, like, that doesn't exist. How dare you, boomer? You don't know. No, I've kicked it, no problem. I got a great relationship. You know, it's like, all that's really valid. I mean, except for the insults towards me, which sounds curiously like, that are my feelings. But it's like, the addiction is a real experience. Marijuana addiction is a real experience. There's withdrawal. You come off of it, you get your dreams back. You start dreaming in Technicolor, just like within a week or two after chemically dependent upon marijuana to complete abstinence. You get your dreams back. Obviously, it's healthy, in all sorts of ways when you're that far along to sustain abstinence. But I want to talk a little bit about also, like, there's a social phenomenon that what happened, and I started this video with, like, it wasn't marijuana's fault. I was the sick one. And what happens is, in a society, in a capitalistic society that takes a plant, that's a flowering plant, that once a year flowers in a state of nature, even cultivated in a farm, right? And you take that and you rip that out of a state of nature, so that's no longer built into a cycle, a seasonal cycle. It's ripped out of every context from which rites of passage, forms of initiation, forms of sacred encounter with reverence, you might be using cannabis or other forms. I mean, this is like our ancestors. Like, this is a common, it's like, oh yeah, there was a gift in gaining access to alternative states of consciousness through forms of ritual and use of cannabis and tobacco and all sorts of other all sorts of other, even alcohol, right? And you rip it away from that, and then you make it available widespread on the market. You start producing it year round, so much that it's just, you can start scientifically engineering higher counts of THC. And then all of a sudden, a culture, an addictive culture, hyper, beyond a comfort culture to a culture in need of consistent relief from the existential anxiety of the rat race, right? Or however you want to describe sort of like the third millennium Christian post-capitalistic culture that we're sort of like drowning in. And you rip cannabis out of all those earlier forms of a healthy relationship embedded in a natural rhythm, and then you just widespread. And that's what's happening right now. And so like more and more people are realizing like, oh my God, I'm smoking daily. I'm relying upon this like medicine. I have what's called spiritual bypassing. Which doesn't work in the long run. Like, I've used cannabis to get access to higher experiences of emotional states, right? Or relief from the anxieties or forms of depressive states that are constantly befalling me. And then all of a sudden, like, I grew tolerance and I don't get access to that anymore. And I haven't developed the disciplines, the spiritual disciplines, the disciplines of mind and body that give me a baseline of emotional stability to access in times of meditation, in times of spiritual high. We get to access those without the need for stimulants or enhancers, right? So the dilemma was not that marijuana was a problem. Now you might be able to say like, yeah, you know what? In a hyper-capitalistic culture, the proliferation of cannabis on the market might be a problem. But in and of itself, like, I became the one that was hopelessly dependent. I became the sick one. And I often like that they say that my relationship to marijuana was almost like one of a bad marriage, like a marriage gone bad. It's like, I love you and you've done so much for me, but this cycle of violence cannot continue because I'm using you to distance myself from taking responsibility for other areas of my life. And it's becoming consistently unhelpful. And I love you, but we can no longer be together. And that's where I got with cannabis. And it was interesting that I had to get rid of that dependency in order to give me access to developing the spiritual disciplines I needed to take responsibility for the areas of my life where I had that I needed to mature in, right? And the whole point of life is to grow into a mature, empowered state in an area, explore, be creative, and then when that gets a little bit boring, we go to a different area. With cannabis, I just, everything stalled out for me. And I see this over and over with my clients too. And it's going to increasingly become an obvious crutch or an obvious challenge to the growth of individuals and their dreams and the development of their potential, because it does in the long run produce, it's a depressant, quote unquote. It produces a type of numbing effect, and I was able to function like 60%. And I remember realizing like I'm never going to complete my book. And plenty of people have written books. High, smoking every day. That's not abnormal. I couldn't. Plenty of people have manifested outstanding dreams on cannabis. I couldn't. And that self-understanding, that clarity of my own relationship has been one of the most powerful practices in my entire life, because that gave me, upon that foundation of just like, it's time for me to leave this behind. And that's normal and natural as well. I can let things go. And my relationship to cannabis had to be let go. And now I've gotten so many gifts. Over 14 years of sobriety, including alcohol, all mood and mind altering drugs except for caffeine. The addictive process continues. And it's interesting how I break up one gross area, or an area that's, I'm hyper addictive and it's causing me so much problems, and that the same sort of neurotic dependency sort of migrates down. And I have cleared away an incredible amount of barriers to, one, I might say, whoa, I'm a little bit dependent upon caffeine, or I'm a little bit dependent upon like forms of distraction, but all in all, on the whole, the path of spiritual growth, starting with putting down the most harmful relationship that I had, which was with cannabis and alcohol. The path of spiritual growth has been made available, but it was only made available after I put those things down. So I work with my clients all the time on doing just that. And if you watch this whole video, outstanding. There's so much more to say about cannabis. So many books have been written about cannabis, but it's one of those examples of what, it's one of those primary metaphors, social metaphors for an addictive society that we live in. So we have to be mindful and stand at the guard of our minds and our bodies and our community, so that we can live well, because it's not, it's not an easy task to grow spiritually and to renew one's mind and to let go of things that have served me for so long. Letting go of things that have served you for so long, it's one of the most challenging spiritual disciplines that you ever. And I needed help to do it. That's what I do with all of my clients today. So if you want to connect with me, please reach out to me. I'm happy to do a one-on-one call for free and give you some tools. I also am on spiritual engineering and do a lot of, just upload a lot of my videos there. Obviously, you're finding me on YouTube. I hope you're so well today. And if you're struggling with cannabis at all, like, it's a real thing. And I just pray you give yourself an opportunity to try something new, to give yourself some space from that, or to recognize that the relationship has become addictive, and you've got to put it to death. And that's a real thing. And you do that in service of the plant, right? And in service of you. It's a mutually beneficial decision. So I spent too many years betraying not only myself, but the plant, and demanding more, like going to a well that would only serve me water, and demanding, like love. It's like, this well only has water. This well doesn't have eternal love, like, or whatever. Or it's an empty well, rather. And this well, I keep going trying to get water from this empty well. Anyway, the metaphor is exhausted. If you haven't heard it yet, you are loved. Hope you're so well. Connect with me, message me, and have a beautiful day.